All right, so do you know what we're doing? I
Yep.
just explained it in that other meeting, so you probably don't even need me now.
I would not go that far. There is very little proof that I don't need you.
You
Yeah,
could
I think
try
I
it.
know.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I'd still need like a hand puppet or something. Like,
I can't believe we don't have hand puppets.
it is kind of surprising that hand puppets aren't a natural part of this room's
I can't believe the
ecology.
value that I add is being equated with a hand puppet.
That's not what I said. What I said is if I had to do it without, did you not hear me say?
No, I heard you.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, let's do it. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett. I am joined by Tammy Melchien. Tammy, how you doing today?
Good.
Tammy, I could not do this without Tammy. Let it be said, regardless of how far into the pre-show our conversation spills, I could not do this without Tammy. Tammy, we had some changes.
We did.
We made some changes.
We did.
And I don't know how far we want to go into the history of all that.
You
but
probably don't care about the whole history of
here's
it.
what you need to know. We were going to go Holy Spirit series into some kind of a generosity, genetically generous 2.0 series. We switched those.
But that wasn't enough change.
That wasn't enough change. We have now kind of shifted the construct of genetically generous, moved away from that after some counsel from some very good, wise people about generosity and about what we should be doing in this moment. And so, Tammy, talk a little bit about that.
All right, so we really are going to be doing this series called "In God We Trust," and in some ways, this is a like nuts and bolts ABCs of finances, generosity, all of that kind of stuff. The reality is, we really haven't taught on this type of content for 3-4 years now because we had the One Initiative, and then this past year we did Genetically Generous, which was a different way to talk about generosity. And so we are going to do a little bit of a nuts and bolts message for this generosity series this year.
Yeah, and I think it is something that is a felt need, and it is something that people are talking about. You know, I want to be generous, but I can't get out of debt. I want to be generous, but whatever their barrier is. This is an attempt in 3 weeks to really try to hit those barriers, and then I think to encourage people to take a next step. What's the next step? So it's called In God We Trust, and there's a little bit of wordplay there. Which
that's
is
on
nice.
money, which is interesting. Just in prepping for the teaching team stuff, to realize that wasn't always our motto, and that's not always been on our money. I was looking at the history of why. I don't know, just some little fun facts there. That part of the reason that first appeared on a coin more during the time of the Civil War, and then it didn't actually become law for it to be on money until the 1950s, and it really was in response to communism.
Oh, wow.
And wanting to set ourselves apart as like different from
That's
that.
interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So
that is
anyway,
interesting.
I didn't know that, but that's why In God We Trust is on our money and became our official motto.
All right. Well, this is the title of this series,
Yes.
and each week we're talking about trust. And so, talk a little bit about what the overall series is, or if we've already done that, you can dive right into week one.
Well, I mean, overall, it's so many of us just feel financial anxiety over money. Again, the stats on. I think the latest thing I saw is 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, which means they're like a month away from destruction, and that's why there's so much anxiety about that. And and again, if you look at the stats on debt, the stats on, all of that stuff, it's a pretty bleak picture. And so we long to feel a financial freedom. And the reality is financial freedom is possible for all of us, whether we are making the money that we think it takes to be financially free or whether we're not. That really has nothing to do with it. And so this series is about helping us learn the path to financial freedom. And so each week of the series, we're looking at a different aspect that's going to help us take that journey.
All right, so week 1, we're looking at the attitude of trust.
Yes.
And so where are we headed with week 1?
Okay, so again, it all comes to trusting God, but there's an attitude about that. And so in this first week, we're actually starting with a previous message that we had at Community way back there was a series called Elementary, and
Yeah,
so
probably like 2013 or something like that.
yeah.
Does that
So we're
sound
gonna
right?
we're gonna do a rework of that message that looks at some of the attitudes, and this is where we'll address things like, we tend to think it's my money, but no, it's God's. We tend to think I made this, but really it's God who has given us the ability to do that. So we're gonna confront some of the things about our attitude having to do with money, and and also just in this beginning week, you always have to kind of address the fact that people clam up whenever you talk about money, or they get angry when you talk about money. And so we're just going to have to deal with the attitudinal stuff that comes about this area of our lives, and hopefully help people see where that attitudinal kind of sometimes negative reaction we have is one of the things that keeps us from being on the path to financial freedom. And so just say, okay, what in my attitude needs to change so that I can move forward on this journey?
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And when Proverbs says there's a way that appears to be right, but in the end leads to death, I mean, we're not really messing around with that attitude
Yeah, we're not messing
stuff.
around with that.
That's
No.
serious. All right. So after we've kind of shaped our attitude more to be in line with what God wants, then we're ready to start some practices, the practices of trust.
Yes, so the practices of trust means trusting kind of what God instructs us to do through His words, the practices that will help us move along this path to financial freedom. And so, one of the things we're going to address in this is you have to have a plan financially. And again, that's where most Americans living paycheck to paycheck, or I think for a lot of us, we put the paycheck in the bank and then we just go start using the cards and we don't really have a plan. And if you don't know where your money is going, you're going to wonder where it went, I think is one of the lines there. So we're going to look at practices here. And so really, and I know on the map I have 4 there. I think as we're brainstorming, we might move that down to 3, because I think debt reduction can kind of come under the heading of save. I was watching a recent Andy Stanley talk, and he talks about the practices just simply give, save, live. And I kind of like the easiness of that. And so that's what I'm thinking right now. So
That Andy Stanley, he can coin a phrase.
he's not bad.
If you're into that sort of thing.
So we'll briefly probably address give in this talk, but let people know that that's the bulk of what we're going to focus in on week 3. So we'll briefly do that. I could imagine us really spending a lot of time in the save thing here, and some practical things. We'll probably pull out some Dave Ramsey stuff about the first step is to get this $1,000 emergency fund, and then how do you pay down the debt that you're in, so that then you can look at saving, both short-term saving, which are things like, I want a new couch, or Christmas is coming and I need to save towards that, or long-term saving, which is retirement and that type of thing. And so the hope with this week is for people then to look at to look at that plan, and like, what is your plan in order to be on this path to financial freedom? And one of the things that a consultant we're working with, Steve Strobe, talks about is this. So if you think about this, give, save, live, the problem is the first 2 are then supposed to determine the third. Okay, so when you figure out your plan for giving and your plan for saving, then what's left there is what's supposed to determine, okay, based on what's left here now, I need to determine what my lifestyle is. The problem so many of us get into is we start with number 3 and we start living, and oftentimes it's not within the bounds of that. And then we feel like, I want to give, but I can't right now. Or, I have to put this on the credit card and build up my debt.
I'm ready for it, but oh no, the air conditioning went out and I got to fix it.
Yeah. And so where we get into so much trouble is we start with number 3, and then it messes up the whole system. So that's what we're looking at, nuts and bolts stuff in week 2.
All right, that's good. And so then we're ready to begin a journey, the journey of trust.
Yes, the journey of trust. And the plan right now, we haven't brainstormed yet, but we're thinking we're going to bring back the concept of the generosity ladder, and it's really about a journey. You know, again, the path to financial freedom is about this journey and growing in generosity, because every time you take a next step in generosity, you let go of a little bit more of your selfishness, and you take another step towards kind of being obedient to what God has called us to in living generous lives. And so if you're not familiar with the generosity letter, I'm not sure if we will use, this is the last time we talked about it, the phrases we used. There's different people that teach on this concept that use different ways to describe it. So I'm not sure if that is, but it's kind of like looking at this, you know, if you're giving nothing, the first step is to just give something. You know, if you're giving something, maybe the next step is to become a percentage giver. You know, then the next step is to become an actual tither. And then maybe the next step is, what does it look like for me to give beyond the tithe? And so whatever we end up calling them, it's about taking that next step. And so
this won't be the kind of thing of like, hey, it's a 10-week tithing challenge or anything along those lines.
I don't think so. I think
we're really looking at the next
step. Because it's the journey of trust. And so for each person, what is your next step? And whatever that is, take that.
Yeah. And many of the people who are hearing this and the entire series, you know, I mean, there are so many first-time givers from Celebration Generosity. This may be their first big challenge to become a giver on a regular rhythm, on a regular basis. So, I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, we're talking about this like, oh, we're familiar with this, we kind of get this, but I don't know, it's good for me to remember sometimes that, you know, for so many people,
a lot of people have never heard
this will be the first time they've heard it. So,
and again, if you think about it, because we haven't taught on this type of practical stuff in a while. So if people have been here longer than 3 years,
they may not,
shorter than 3, years.
Apart from other resources like other classes that have taken place, this would be the first time.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I mean, obviously, making the changes to make this happen makes it feel like, oh, well, this is really important because we wouldn't have made those changes otherwise. I do really feel like it's very important for us to do and to get a handle on and really for all of us to take our next steps. One of the things too to be aware of as you're experiencing this podcast, and those of you in particular who are brainstorming off of for big idea content for the large group services, be aware that the brainstorming that takes place with the teaching team may actually have more of a quicker tie to what will end up being in the talk than the maps. So as you're brainstorming with this, just be aware to be on the lookout for the teaching team notes. They're in the same folder. They'll show up on...
Yeah, I would think... What is today?
Today is
so what's Friday's
Tuesday.
date?
Friday's date. Today's date is the 8th.
So the 11th?
Sure.
Shooting for the January 11th for the teaching team notes to be in the big Idea Factory folder.
Yeah. So in addition to your homework of what you're doing here right now, taking the podcast, take a look at those teaching team notes. All right. Well, that's all we have to say about that. We need to stop talking because Alec's going to come here any minute with a bench.
I have to pick up someone from an airport.
And Tammy's got to pick up someone from an airport, and I need to drink some more water. So for the Big Idea podcast, this has been Tammy and Eric.
So
long,
long,
everybody.